The title of that article is "A Foot Cut Off," and that is, they did not bury the lead. That is what happened. Hi, and welcome to day one of Amy telling a history story on the internet until her friend Sean is ready to record a podcast with her about it. My name is Amy, and I am a family history researcher, and I run the blog How Your Ancestors Died. I also present at Stand Up History, which is an event third Wednesday of every month at Muse Cafe, where a group of local historians get together to tell hopefully funny and entertaining stories about history. Now, full disclosure, I don't know. I just breathed right on the microphone. There's no way that's going to sound good. I don't know a lot about the internet. I see people telling stories, and they hold tiny microphones like this. Is that, I don't know if that's cool, but that's what I'm going to do. And then maybe if I tell a good enough history story, we can convince Sean that we have to make time to make the podcast. And so, shout out to Sean, who it's definitely both our faults that we haven't done it yet, because timing for things is very difficult when two people are crazy, busy, and talented, and just have a lot going on. But Sean does some amazing research over at the Queens of Queen City website, so you can check him out there as well as seeing him at Stand Up History. So, enough of intro. Let's get into it. Story number one. I want to talk about the person that got me intrigued for family history research to begin with many moons ago, when I was a tiny baby teenager. So it was a family story, kind of a lore in my family, that my grandfather's grandfather, so my second great grandfather, was murdered. And you know how when stories get passed down from generation to generation and people are talking about it, and then you hear it and you think, that's not what happened. Nobody did that. That's very dramatic. Dramatic stuff doesn't happen to us. So that's what I thought when I heard the story of how Samuel Whalen died. And right then, Ancestry was just kicking off and starting to be big, and there were commercials for it on the television. And I am very susceptible to marketing. And so I signed up for an Ancestry account. This is Samuel's portion of the tree on the Ancestry account. Samuel Whalen. He was born in 1860. His parents were, one was an Irish immigrant, his father was an Irish immigrant, his mother was born in Pennsylvania. They married in Cincinnati, and he was the sixth of 11 children, 10 of whom reached adulthood. And so he was part of a big family. And his father was a turnkey. There were various police districts all over Cincinnati, and each of them had their own little jail room. And so he was a turnkey at those district stations. So not the main big jail, but the little district stations. And so that's kind of helpful because it was a semi-public position. And so I think his family ended up in the newspaper a little bit more often than maybe they otherwise would have. And they're a little bit easier to spot in the newspaper because they almost always reference that James was a turnkey at the time. And so it makes it a little bit easier, because a lot of times when you're researching and all you have is the newspaper articles, they don't always give you enough information to know for sure that you're reading about the person that you are researching. A lot of times you get a name, sometimes you get an address, sometimes you get an age, sometimes you get a spouse or a parent, but not always. Sometimes you just get a name. And there was more than one Samuel Whalen in Cincinnati at that time. So Samuel had an intriguing life. And so we're going to start, part one is going to be about his early 20s. Samuel first shows up in the newspaper, the Cincinnati Enquirer, in the year 1882. And the title of that article is "A Foot Cut Off." And that is, they did not bury the lead. That is what happened. His foot got cut off. So he worked at the rail yard. He was a switchman. And he was trying to board the number 90 engine, which was a train on the Marietta and Cincinnati railroad line. He stepped up onto it, his foot slipped down onto the track, and the train kept on rolling, and it rolled right over his foot. And the article says his right foot was cut off. it doesn't say exactly where or like how much of the foot was cut off. And in all of the references to him for the rest of his life, it never references that he only had one foot. And in census records and things like that, he's not listed as a person with a disability. I also asked my grandfather, who was not never met Samuel. Samuel died before my grandfather was born, but he heard some firsthand stories of Samuel, and it was never referenced that he only had one foot. So I'm thinking the train cut off maybe just like the toe part or something, right? And so it was an injury, but maybe not a devastating one, because it seems like life just went back to normal after he was done. This next little bit of Samuel's life is one that I am pretty sure is about him, but honestly, maybe not. So, what the newspaper references is a man named Samuel Whalen who worked at the C&O Railroad, which is where Samuel worked. And so that's two pieces of kind of corroborating information, but Samuel Whalen isn't the most unique name in the world. So many people worked for the railroad. This could be about someone else. My gut says it isn't, that it probably is the same person, but it never lists an address, it never lists an age, it never lists parents' names. And so I don't 100% know that this next bit of the story is actually about my ancestor, Samuel Whalen, but I think it's an interesting story, so I'm going to tell it to you anyway. And then, hey, this is something people do on the internet. You can tell me if you think it's true. You can just let me know if you think Samuel did it, because this part of the story, Samuel gets arrested, and charges were brought against him by a woman named Alice McCafferty. Alice was about 8 years Samuel's juniors. At the time of the story, Alice is about 19 years old, and she brings charges against Samuel that he seduced her with promises of marriage and then refused to marry her. Um, but a child did result from that union, and from that adventure, hate, you know, from that experience, a child resulted from that experience, and now Alice wanted Samuel to be legally named as that child's father so that he could start paying her child support. Now, the newspaper at the time was a very kind of gossipy institution, and so it had some opinions to give on Alice's situation. The first is that the article stated that Alice loved wisely, but too well. And so it also describes her as sprightly and exceedingly pretty. And so, honestly, that balances out pretty well. I've seen newspapers be much harsher to people than that newspaper was. And so, at this hearing, they set bail for Samuel. It's $500. He's not able to pay it. And so he goes to jail until their court date. And at that court date, it is determined that Samuel Whalen is the father of Alice McCafferty's child. The baby was conceived the Halloween before, which I think is interesting that they call that out. And in this second article, the newspaper notes that the details of the case are too disgusting to print. And I have no idea what that means. There was no indication that there was any sort of violence related to this conception. They might just be talking about their moral judgment on what had happened, but they do not elaborate. And so Samuel is convicted, and he is ordered to pay $350 in child support. And someone who is more prepared to be talking about this would be like, in today's money, that's $1 million. I didn't look it up. It's some amount of money. And so the way he was supposed to pay it was $50 up front and then $10 a month until he reached $350. And he said, yeah, I can't pay any of that ever. I'm not going to do that. And so he went back to jail. They didn't say for what amount of time. And he served a jail term because he could not pay his child support. And so Alice's daughter, her name was Pearl. She was um, raised for a couple of years by her mother, and then given over to her grandparents, who were then her maternal grandparents, who were then listed as her parents in kind of all future documentation. And so when she, in the 1900 census, she's listed as the granddaughter of her grandparents whom she lives with. Her grandfather was a blacksmith, which is a cool job. When she was married, she her grandfather's name is listed as her father, and so he is the person that raised her. And I think what happened to Alice is a couple of years after Pearl was born, she actually married someone else and then had a family, and so she left Pearl with her parents and kind of moved on. Pearl eventually moved out to California, where she lived until 1960 and had a family of her own. So maybe someday I'll find distant cousins and then figure out if this part of the story is actually truly about the Samuel Whalen that I'm descended from, or if it's about some other person entirely. And so that's going to wrap up part one of the story of Samuel Whalen. And so, part two, we're going to dig into his life as a family man and then how he was eventually murdered. So, thank you for listening. If you're intrigued by family history and you want to learn a little bit about yours, I do help people out with that. So, you can reach out to me at howyourancestorsdied.com. Or if you want to see some stories from some of the other research that I've done, it's listed. It's listed there on my blog, and you can go find it. How are you supposed to end these things? That was lame. Sorry.